Power corrupts. But absolute power creates monsters. Imagine a ruler who sees himself not merely as emperor, but as a god, gladiator, and living embodiment of divine strength, all while the city he rules burns around him. That man was Commodus, the son of the philosopher Marcus Aurelius, a young man born into privilege, yet destined to become one of the most infamous figures in Roman history. His story is a study in megalomania, paranoia, and the terrifying consequences of unchecked authority. In the 2nd century AD, Rome was at the height of its power. The empire stretched from the windswept cliffs of Britain to the banks of the Euphrates, and from the Rhine in the north to the Sahara in the south. Trade routes connected distant provinces, Roman law governed a diverse population, and the Pax Romana ensured peace and prosperity. Under the reign of the 5 good emperors, the empire had grown stable, culturally rich, and administratively sophisticated. Marcus Aurelius, philosopher and leader, represented the pinnacle of this golden age. Yet even he made one catastrophic mistake. Breaking a tradition that had preserved Rome for decades, he chose his biological son Commodus as heir instead of adopting the most capable successor. Born in 161 AD, Commodus entered a world of unparalleled privilege. From birth, he was surrounded by the wealth and power of imperial Rome, but unlike his father, he lacked the philosophical grounding and temperament that had made Marcus Aurelius a revered ruler. From an early age, Commodus witnessed the brutality of life on the Danube frontier, accompanying his father during campaigns against Germanic tribes. The young prince saw war firsthand, the chaos, the violence, the suffering. And rather than tempering him with wisdom, these experiences seemed to ignite a fascination with spectacle, dominance, and personal glory. When Marcus Aurelius died in 180 AD, the 18-year-old Commodus inherited an empire of 50 million people across 3 continents. Initially there was hope. Perhaps the son of a philosopher could bring a measure of prudence to the throne. But these hopes were swiftly dashed. Commodus's first act as sole emperor was to abandon his father's carefully planned military campaigns against the Germanic tribes. While popular with war-weary soldiers, this hasty peace treaty demonstrated his fundamental misunderstanding of imperial duty. The threats were not eliminated, they were merely postponed, setting a dangerous precedent for the empire's northern borders. Back in Rome, Commodus's true character emerged. Unlike previous emperors who maintained the pretense of republican governance, he embraced autocracy fully. Experienced advisors were dismissed, the Senate ignored, and he surrounded himself with flatterers who reinforced his growing delusions. The imperial court transformed from a center of administration into a theater of paranoia and excess. The young emperor demanded elaborate ceremonies of obeisance, insisted on being addressed with divine titles, and pursued anyone he suspected of disloyalty. Senators, even those who had served faithfully under Marcus Aurelius, lived in constant fear. Their families and fortunes hung precariously on the whims of a ruler who saw enemies in every shadow. Perhaps the most telling sign of Commodus's instability was his obsession with the gladiatorial games. While emperors had historically used the arena to demonstrate largesse and maintain public support, Commodus treated it as a personal stage. He identified himself with gods like Jupiter and Mars, but ultimately chose Hercules as his divine persona. Clad in lion skins and carrying a massive club, he entered the Colosseum to fight, though rarely against true opponents. Slaves, wounded soldiers, or weakened animals were presented as adversaries, while the emperor's victories were meticulously orchestrated to reinforce his godlike image. The citizens of Rome witnessed these grotesque performances, understanding all too well that they were not witnessing divine heroism but the sadistic whims of a madman. Commodus's delusions extended far beyond the arena. He renamed the months after himself, changing September to Commodus, October to Invictus, and so on. Rome itself became Colonia Commodiana. Temples and festivals were reoriented to honor him as a living god. Provincial governors were forced to erect shrines in his name. Failure to display devotion could lead to immediate execution. Even the traditional Roman practice of deifying emperors posthumously was abandoned. Commodus demanded recognition while alive, and the empire was obliged to comply. The emperor's paranoia grew alongside his divine pretensions. A delayed response from a senator, a hesitant bow, a quiet discussion. Any perceived slight could trigger imprisonment, torture, or execution. Rome became a city of fear, where survival demanded careful flattery and endless vigilance. Informants infiltrated every household, military unit, and workplace. Spouses reported on each other. Slaves spied on masters. Soldiers monitored officers. The very social fabric of Rome unraveled as traditional values of honor, loyalty, and duty were subordinated to survival under a ruler who ruled by terror. Economic consequences were severe. Commodus's obsession with the arena and exotic games drained the treasury. Lions from Africa, tigers from India, Elephants from distant lands, he demanded them all indifferent to cost. Wealthy families feared investment and trade, as accumulation of wealth could draw imperial suspicion. Tax revenues fell, commerce stagnated, and the empire's economic engine faltered. Militarily, the northern borders were vulnerable, as the emperor had abandoned the frontier campaigns and devoted little attention to army logistics or strategy. Political and social decay went hand in hand, accelerated by the concentration of power in one man's increasingly unstable hands. By the final years of Commodus's rule, even his closest supporters realized the emperor had become an existential threat to the empire. Conspiracies formed among those with the greatest access and the most to lose. At the center was Latus, commander of the Praetorian Guard, once loyal but now fearful. He joined forces with Eclectus, the imperial chamberlain, and Marcia, Commodus's concubine. Each had witnessed the emperor's descent into madness and understood that action was necessary. The plan required careful timing. The emperor's obsession with gladiatorial games and public spectacles provided both opportunity and distraction. The conspirators' strategy relied initially on poison, administered by Marcia during a private meal. Commodus drank the tainted wine and began to feel ill. But the poison worked more slowly than intended, and the emperor, ever suspicious, realized something was wrong. His paranoia flared, and he summoned guards demanding explanations. Survival required improvisation. Narcissus, a wrestler and gladiator trainer recruited as backup, was dispatched to finish the task. On December 31st, 192 AD, Commodus, weakened and paranoid, took his bath. The waters, once a place of luxury and indulgence, became the stage of his demise. Narcissus entered swiftly. Despite the emperor's strength, he was no match for the assassin's training and resolve. Struggling in the confined space of the bath, Commodus was strangled, his cries drowned by the sound of running water. The god emperor, who had demanded the reverence of the entire empire, fell victim to the inescapable reality of mortality. Following his death, the conspirators acted quickly to stabilize Rome. Pertinax, an elderly senator with military experience and impeccable reputation, was offered the throne. Though reluctant, he accepted, understanding that the alternative was continued chaos. Statues of Commodus were destroyed, the renamed city reverted to Rome, and the months returned to their traditional names. Yet the empire was far from restored. The treasury was empty, the army weakened, and administrative structures undermined by years of fear and corruption. Pertinax's brief rule of 87 days ended in murder, triggering the Year of the Five Emperors, a period of civil war that demonstrated just how thoroughly Commodus had destabilized Rome. Commodus's life and reign serve as one of history's starkest illustrations of the dangers of absolute power wielded by an unstable mind. A man born to greatness, trained to govern a vast empire, squandered his inheritance through arrogance, delusion, and sadistic obsession. His identification with Hercules, his obsession with gladiatorial spectacle, and his persecution of those closest to him exemplify the destructive potential of concentrated power, unchecked by moral restraint or institutional safeguards. Even in death, Commodus's story resonates. Strangled in a bathtub, his godlike pretensions rendered meaningless, he died as any mortal does alone, vulnerable and utterly human. The very institutions that had elevated him could not protect him when the time came. The conspirators' actions, motivated not by noble ideals but survival, underscore the extent to which Commodus had corrupted Rome's political and social structures. The legacy of Commodus is both timeless and cautionary. It demonstrates that even the mightiest institutions, the most sophisticated bureaucracies, and the most disciplined armies are vulnerable when power is concentrated in the hands of a man incapable of restraint. His reign warns of the psychological dangers of absolute authority, the fragility of societal norms under terror, and the devastating consequences of prioritizing personal glorification over public duty. Commodus achieved a kind of immortality, though not the divine remembrance he craved. History remembers him as a symbol of megalomania, cruelty, and the catastrophic impact of unchecked power. His story reminds us that leadership demands not just privilege or intelligence, but moral character, self-awareness, and the capacity to govern responsibly. Even the grandeur of Rome, with its unmatched achievements in architecture, law, and culture, was nearly undone by a single man's descent into madness. And so the emperor who believed himself a god fell as all mortals must. Commodus's life and death, from the marble halls of the palace to the blood-stained sands of the arena, remain enduring lessons in the dangers of unchecked authority. The theatre of his life, the grotesque spectacle, the terror, the delusions of divinity serves as a warning. Absolute power, when combined with instability, does not merely corrupt, it can destroy everything it touches. Rome itself nearly fell under the weight of a ruler who could not see beyond his own reflection. If you want to uncover more shocking stories from history and see the real truth behind the legends, hit that subscribe button and join our journey into the past.